All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free wherever you get your podcast, including iTunes and Spotify. Do not forget to rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Make sure it's a 5-star review. You can say whatever you want to say. Just make sure it's a 5-star review. John Garcia is joining us today, and he comes courtesy of LinkedIn. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. How you doing, John?
I'm doing well, Steven. Good to be back on with you. Season's here, pretty much, so we're excited, man. This is like the apex of football for us. Everything's gearing up at every level, so hard not to be excited at this point.
Yeah, it's like we're like 2 weeks from tomorrow away from week 0. I mean...
Amazing. Just amazing. Let's get there.
Nebraska, Northwestern, and Ireland. Let's do it. All right. So anyway, I want to talk to you. Ole Miss had a big weekend. We weren't able to connect the last couple of weeks because of various things. So that's the reason this is a little bit late. But Ole Miss got a couple of commitments from several players, including Jamarius Brown. He's kind of the most highly thought of. Talk a little bit about Jamarius, if you would.
What an exciting football player, right? In-state kid coming out of Moss Point, 265 pounds, listed, of course, as an interior defensive lineman where he will inevitably play in the SEC West, but there's so much more to him than just that. I mean, he plays a ton of offense for Moss Point, lines up in the backfield. This is more of a J.J. Pegues type of two-way guy where he's a lead blocker, a tight end, a fullback on offense, and you see just the competitive nature he brings and the point of contact ability he brings on offense, and it gets you excited about defense because he can absolutely wreck you at the point of contact. He plays with great leverage, and there's a lot of effort and intensity in that motor that he presents on defense as well. And what I like about him on tape is that he lines up everywhere. We see him at defensive end, defensive tackle. He's head up on the center at times. This is a kid who you can tell his coaches just love him because they are able to use him as a chess piece and move him up and down that defensive line with big impacts either way. This kid's even blocked a punt at 270 pounds. I mean, it's really interesting to see him once the football is snapped. He's just like a different guy. So I think the foundation athletically and in terms of his position is absolutely there. I think his body has great length and a great frame, so I think you can add weight to it. He could probably play more traditionally at 285, 290 down the line for Ole Miss, and that's what you need. You need guys, obviously, who have the great size, strength, and leverage that Jamarius possesses, but also with the upside to be able to play inside against the big boys, down in, down out on early downs against the run, and eventually to rush the passer as an interior guy. So there's a lot to like about his game now, but even more to like about his game down the line.
Yeah, and it was just a big weekend for Ole Miss getting him 4 stars because they also pulled one in from Avery. He's from up in Maryland. Talk about him a little bit.
Another interesting two-way guy. This was a quarterback a couple of years ago up at Good Counsel, one of the better schools in the Catholic League up there, which is a really good league of football, by the way. Great football up in that D.C. area, and he's played all over the field, but there's no doubt that his future is as a pass rusher, and I think he's got some versatility to his game as well. I think he's listed right now at about 230 pounds. But this is a tall kid, legitimately 6'4", closer to 6'5", probably by now, so he can carry more weight and be kind of a strong side defensive end down the line. Think of Sam Williams when you're talking about body composition. Sam was at a similar size at the high school level in Montgomery, Alabama. So Avery's got a lot of upside physically to grow into, but the floor right now is really interesting and intriguing athletically. I mentioned the quarterback background that he has. This was a big physical dual threat running quarterback. So there's a lot of natural instincts, speed, and vision that come to play with Avery. And that helps him, I think, as a pass rusher because he can navigate the muck and the wash just a little bit better than your typical defensive end. And I think it offers him a little bit more ability to maybe drop into coverage and maybe play some non-pass rusher roles depending on how his body develops, because he does have a little bit more of an overall football foundation. But at the surface level, if he's a strong side or weak side pass rusher, I think he's got enough get off and bend to beat offensive tackles with speed. And as he fills out, he'll be able to create some counter moves there and win a little bit more with leverage and power to offset the natural ability he shows as a speed rusher. So a lot to like of Neo Avery, a former Penn State commit. And it's important to go out of the region here, right? I mean, we can fall in love with local guys and regional guys all the time, and that's great. But to show that national brand that Ole Miss wants to be, you've got to go pluck outside the region. And that's something we've seen a ton in the portal, and now we're seeing it more at the high school level as well.
Yeah, the first thing I notice whenever I see Neo on film, the thing that just kind of jumps off is how quick twitch he is, especially at the high school level. He can absolutely embarrass offensive linemen if you don't come to play.
100%. And I think that shows on offense too. You know, he's just a football player. And I think, you know, when you simplify that for a kid like that, again, against very good competition, you enable him to truly just let go. And you see that physicality off the line of scrimmage with the short area explosion. And by the way, when he gets to the ball character, there's some finishing ability in his game as well, which if we're seeing that at 225, 230, imagine it at 255, 260, which is where he could be, you know, by his second year in Oxford with the strength and conditioning program in place. So there's a lot of upside, I think, with Neo Avery's physical game, but the floor is really strong here if he is even just a specialist as a pass rusher.
Yeah, pretty good. The next player I want to talk about, I think he was in Opelika, Alabama, transferred to North Carolina, is Javonte Connors, a tight end. You look on film, and he looks legit, but then you see recruiting services hitting him at like lower 3-star ratings. But he's a 250-pound guy that's 6'4" that catches the ball. What am I missing here?
I think there's a lack of traditional tight end tape available on him. So there's a lot of questions about, you know, how well does he block and some of the conventional things that you look at. And look, not a lot of scouts are going to Opelika. I love that whole area, but not a lot of scouts were going there, and even less will go to Kernersville, North Carolina. But this kid can play. He's a flex tight end. He says it himself. And we know Ole Miss loves to utilize this. I mean, look at Michael Trigg. I mean, he's going to basically be brought in to play whatever we see Michael Trigg do this year. That's going to be the sell for this Alabama native. Former teammate, of course, of Jarrell Stinson, the freshman corner at Ole Miss there at Opelika. And when Stinson wasn't the vertical threat, it was this kid that was getting the majority of those passing targets. And you see a lot in his game. He moves quite well for 250 pounds. That's really what struck me in the evaluation. Not only is he a vertical guy, and is he a 50-50 ball guy that's just going to out-rebound the defensive back or a linebacker, and he's got all that in his bag. But this is a kid who wants to run routes. I mean, he can stick his foot in the ground and absolutely change direction with authority. And that's some of the stuff that I started to like the more I watched of him. Great ball skills, comfortable with the ball in the air, can capture it with the defender on his back, over the shoulder, extended away from his body, almost like a jumbo wide receiver, which is often how we associate Michael Trigg. And this kid is even heavier than Mike is, probably taller too. So I think there's a lot to like about that lineage that Ole Miss is trying to build at the tight end position. And yeah, I think there should be some worry about how some of these outlets view this kid, because we all know tight end and these modern flex tight ends, that's the new wave, right? That's the new premium position, the new position that everybody's putting more resources into, whether it's NFL contracts, recruiting, trying to import these basketball players and make them these type of hybrid flex tight ends. We already see that in this kid. So I do think that there's a little bit of undervalued perception around his game, but certainly a big get for Ole Miss, especially when you think of him as a 6A guy in Opelika, Alabama. That's a really big deal when you go into that state and pluck an impact player on either side of the ball.
Yeah, the next kid we're going to talk about comes from a junior college that I worked for Rivals for 10 years, and I never talked about this community college.
Yep.
Southwest Mississippi Community College, the Bears. Vion Miller. It's nice for that school to have somebody coming out, and their uniforms look good. It looks like they're investing a little bit in football right now. This is a guy that you want to get off the bus first. This dude looks really good.
Yeah, you can't teach. I don't care what JUCO it is, 6'6", 330, whatever he's listed as, and then carrying it well those are usually two different things. Miller shows a lot of that coming off the bus, as you mentioned. Just a massive human being, who you just wonder in terms of his position. Offensive tackle is certainly where you just peg him because of that great height and great length. But you just wonder, how fleet of foot is he? Can he be a road grader on the interior? Can he be a front side protector as a right tackle? All of those are great problems to have if you're Ole Miss, because you're going to get a more mature player who's done it against some level of college competition. So I think that creates just a little bit more oomph and onus into the player once he gets into a program like Ole Miss that's going to have some turnover, of course, on the offensive line, and he's going to be one of those guys in the mix immediately. So the more he can do potentially, the better chances, he sees the field pretty early on in Oxford. And yeah, like you said, Stephen, a lot more people are going to be watching ball in Southwest Mississippi JUCO territory than we've maybe ever seen.
Yeah, good player, real good player. Also, before we let you go, I do want to talk. SI released their SI 199. Suntarine Perkins came in at number 68. Talk a little bit about that rankings, where you see Suntarine. Is there a chance to move up? Stuff like that.
Absolutely a chance to move up. We talked about versatility with a lot of these Ole Miss commits earlier. I don't know if there's a more versatile Ole Miss commit than Suntarine Perkins, a guy who plays running back, linebacker. You could probably walk him down and let him rush the passer full time, or he's athletic enough to play safety and just kind of be the navigator of the entire defense, or as a rover of the 90s and early 2000s. This is a lot to like from a football player perspective, but it also creates this doubt, right? What is he going to be a linebacker at the next level? Do we need to see more of him at that position? How does his body, figure relative to that? Does he stay in that 225, 230 range? Does he get a whole lot bigger and then start dominating more downhill? Maybe we change the position projection there. So I think the foundation's great. We love his two-way ability, a true football player, as we mentioned earlier. But yeah, maybe he's got room to improve physically, and maybe that changes where we see him in the final rankings come January. But for us, this is definitely one of the best, if not the best players in the state of Mississippi. He's got that combination of high floor and high ceiling where you really kind of can't deny a very high ranking for a kid like Suntarine Perkins. But I think, most of your audience, Stephen, is probably more concerned about where he's going to play, right? All the cryptic Alabama stuff that we saw over the last couple of months, how much does that play into what he's actually thinking? So Perkins is going to have a lot of eyeballs on him athletically, whether you're talking position projection or certainly just in terms of where he's going to go, because he's that intriguing of a football player. But I think when you talk about his ability, I think he could be a Dylan Moses type, a guy who we were worried about positionally and filling out and all that early in his high school career. But once he actually settles on one position in college, you actually see quick acceleration, and he gets on the field very shortly thereafter because he's able to focus on one spot, and often cases for the first time in his entire life. And that usually can create a pretty quick learning curve. So that's kind of what I expect for Perkins at this point, but we'll definitely be watching him as a senior. And like everyone else, he'll have a chance to move up come January when we wrap up this class.
All right, John Garcia, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs on the show today. Thank you, John, so much for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time.
Always a pleasure, Stephen. Take care, boss.
All right.